and welcome to St. Patrick's Day Feast. Tonight we have Chef Jamie Callison, who is the Executive Chef of the School of Hospitality Business Management at WSU. I'm Caitlin Hennessy, I'm your Program Coordinator for Global Connections. And tonight, throughout the evening, please feel free to ask questions about what we're making, ingredients, any steps along the way, and also use the chat box to comment or to add to the discussion. And one WSU Global student throughout the evening that participates in the chat box will win Chef Jamie Callison's book, The Crimson Spoon. All right, thanks so much, Chef Jamie.
Thank you. I thought you were going to say a free car or something. I was going to go log in. Welcome everybody to our kitchen. This is School Hospitality Business Management Kitchen. I'm the executive chef, and I'm very, very excited about this webinar tonight. We're doing some really fun stuff here. This kind of is a collection of recipes from my family, but more importantly, it's a collection of a lot of input from the students. When I get asked to do something like this, and we're creating recipes, we bring the students in and we do a lot of tasting. And tonight is a collection of a real team that put together these recipes. And so we're very, very excited. The other thing I like to do as a teacher is I like to teach my students to teach. And I think when they become, when they are able to teach, they become a lot better at what they do. So I'm just going to go sit in the back while they do the demo. I'm just kidding. I'm going to be here with them. This is Brittany Barrett, and Brittany Barrett's my student sous chef. She's been with me about 3 years, absolutely amazing. She's going to be talking about some of the brining processes and stuff. And Megan Wells here is going to be talking about the Irish soda bread and kind of which is absolutely amazing. And then I'll be talking about the cooking processes. So I am at this point going to hand it over to Brittany, and she's going to talk about brining and some of the history.
All right, hi everybody. I'm just gonna jump right into it with the brining process. We're actually starting with this tonight because it has to be done 5 days before you plan on eating your St. Patrick's Day meal. So since St. Patrick's Day is next Friday, you want to start this on Sunday or Monday morning. It's a pretty simple process overall. I just have a mix here. It has brown sugar, white sugar, juniper berries, just a generic mixed pickling spice. We also have caraway seeds and mustard seeds in here. One of the really important parts of the brining is the salt that we use. This isn't Himalayan pink salt or any salt that you'd want to put on anything. It's a specific curing salt. I think it's like I call it a super salt. It's specially used for curing because it's meant to pull a lot of the moisture out. We use it for bacons and stuff like that. We keep this locked away when we're not using it so people don't mistake it because it's very dangerous to ingest just on its own. But it's pretty essential for any brining or curing processes. You can buy it on Amazon, but if you don't have access to this, you can just use regular kosher salt as a substitute as well in this recipe. So one of the important things why we brine the meat, it actually adds, and you may be brining like your Thanksgiving turkeys and everything like that, it actually adds moisture to the beef. When it's soaking for 5 days, and you make sure you rotate it every day, the salt and all of the flavors and everything actually go in and are absorbed by the beef, so that it actually takes, when you take it out of the beef, it's about 6 to 8% heavier than it was when you started, so you can really see how it absorbed a lot of the liquids, so that when you start cooking it, it starts with more liquid than it would originally, so it holds a lot more that way, and it comes out a lot more moist and juicy. So for the pickling spice, I just mixed it all together. We also have garlic and just regular honey. I have some simmering water here, and you just mix it all together in this pot until it all absorbs. Garlic's in there too, and the honey. And one thing that's really interesting about the St. Patrick's Day tradition of brining your corned beef is that it's not an Irish tradition at all. It's actually from New York, the brining idea. Actually, pretty much the entire meal that we're doing here, the corned beef, the cabbage, it originated from Irish immigrants in New York. When they first moved here and they were trying to continue their traditions, in Ireland, they started with pork and potatoes because that was a really common thing there. But when they came to New York, pork was incredibly expensive, and potatoes, they weren't as expensive, but they weren't as available as cabbage was. So when they were trying to recreate this meal, their traditional Irish meal, they picked the cheapest things they had on the market, which was your beef brisket and cabbage. And so that's kind of where this originated. And they don't brine their pork when they make their meals in Ireland either. The brining idea came from the Eastern European immigrants that came and were their neighbors, and they kind of picked up this idea. So now this traditional Irish meal is actually from New York, which is funny, but it was created by Irish immigrants. So this is all absorbed in now. So here I have, it's just a quart of ice water. This process, why it's ice water, is just to help it cool down a lot faster. So I'm just gonna pour this straight in, like this. And it's still not gonna be entirely cool, but so you're gonna wanna probably put it in your fridge for an hour or so, make sure it's entirely cool before you start, before you put your corned beef in it. So here I have just our brisket that we're using. We traditionally, we trim off just everything but a little bit of thin layer of this fat here before you put it in the brine. And so I'm not gonna do this right now. We're gonna put this in the back because it's still a little bit warm. And so you trim off everything but a little bit of fat, and then you just set it in the brine, remember 5 days before. So every day you're gonna go in and you're gonna rotate it so that all sides of the beef get properly coated with the brine. And remember to weigh it down. We normally, even here in the kitchen, we just use some small plates just to keep it weighted down so that there's no part of the beef sticking out of the brine. And that's it.
Thank you, Brittany. So, and part of the reason that it's important to learn about the brining process is if you've ever tried to go to the grocery store and buy a corned beef product anytime besides basically almost the 1st of March, it is not available. You really have to search for it. So if you really enjoy that corned beef, you're going to need to create your own brine. And again, with the weighing it down, if you're going to do more than one brisket, you have to make sure that you also reach in there and turn that brisket too, because the brisket will stick to each other and the brine won't be surrounding the full corned beef. So, and the other reason we like to brine our own products here is because we can control the flavor. Maybe we want juniper berries, maybe we want a little bit more pickling spice. Some people will put chili peppers or dried chili flakes in their corned beef brine. So as a family, and I always think about all of our recipes as being an inspiration, as a family, you can slowly start to create your own recipe and your own specific corned beef. And it is a very simple process. And people also just telling the story when people come over and say that you actually brined your own corned beef is pretty exciting. I'm gonna start with the potatoes. We just have basic red potatoes. These are washed, and I kind of like to do some fun things to these, and maybe that's trimming them. I will take either a peeler or just a tournée knife and go around them just to create a little different look so that maybe they're not, and that's just a little turn like this. You can also do a little cut in the top, which some people like to do, which is really simple. None of this is intense culinary secrets. Something like that is kind of fun too, just to make your potatoes fun. Potatoes are one of the things that I really don't do a lot too, besides what I grew up with. Basically, cold salted water, and this water has already been salted. Very important to add salt to it. When you're cooking something from the very beginning, whether it's pasta or whether it's a potato, you want to start building the flavors. Even though we're going to salt this potato afterwards, we want a little bit of salt to be cooked into this potato so you don't just get flavor on the outside, it's cooked all the way through. And that's the same concept with something like a pasta too. So we're just going to put all of our potatoes in the cold water. I'm going to trim one more just for the fun of it. But again, I just go around, and it doesn't have to be an exact straight line. You can see that one's a little bumpy, right? That's okay. I mean, this is gonna be cooked. The skin's gonna, by the time you get your butter and your herbs on there, it's just gonna add kind of a fun look to it. So we're gonna add all these potatoes to our cold water. And it's important to start with cold water too, because if you start with cold water, the potatoes are gonna cook evenly. If you start with hot water, they're gonna cook from the outside in. If you start with cold water, the potatoes become in the temperature all at the same time, and that way you get, whether you're making it for potato salad, or for mashed potatoes, or for something like this where you're trying to keep the shape to them, cold water is essential to start with your potatoes so you don't get them cooked unevenly throughout the potato. So we're just going to turn this on and bring this to a simmer. Now for our cabbage, which is definitely, actually I'm going to start with my brisket. I can't forget the brisket here. For my brisket, we want to cook it in simmering water. So we bring water up to a simmer, and then I'm basically going to take my corned beef right out of the brine and put it into the water. It's going to take about 4 hours on a simmer, depending on how big the brisket is. Very important not to boil the meat. If you boil the meat, it will become tough instead of tender. We're trying to get the meat fork tender. Fork tender is, I know everybody has a huge meat fork like this at home, right? Maybe not, but something like this works really well. You can go into it and you should be able to push with very little resistance. You don't want the meat falling apart, but you definitely want it where you can put the fork in it with little resistance. And you can see when Britley was talking about the fat content, most of the fat was trimmed off. We definitely want to leave some fat on there during the cooking process because that'll cook and add a lot of flavor to our broth here too. And after I glaze this, it's going to be very hard to see. There is a grain here with the brisket, and you see a lot of this in flank steak and stuff. When we go to cut this, it is very, very important to cut against the grain. Right now, you got a lot of connective tissue in this beef. If you cut this along with the grain, it's going to be very tough. Cutting it against the grain is going to help break apart some of that connective tissue, and that is very essential to a really great finished product. Because you can cook this perfectly and then cut it wrong, and you will not end up with the same result. So what we're going to do now is we're going to glaze our corned beef. This is a recipe that we just recently, I've been using something like this recipe for a while. But we really just perfected it in the kitchen here. And we're going to use WSU honey in this recipe. We start, I don't know where we came up with this part, but we come with 3 different kinds of mustard. We use a really good Dijon mustard. A regular, just table mustard, nothing fancy here, just a really simple table mustard. And then my favorite, a really nice stone ground mustard. This really, to me, makes the dish. And then a little bit of brown sugar. And then a little bit of the WSU honey that's produced right here on campus. And the thing I like about using brining my own brisket too is that we buy a lot of WSU beef. I also buy beef from local ranchers here. I can actually showcase something that's from right here on the Palouse. And we don't produce a lot of mustards here, but the honey, the brisket, and all those things add a lot. And sometimes cooking that great meal is also telling that great story. And the WSU honey and those products definitely allow me to do that. And it's not just a great story, it's amazing products. So this just has a little bit of fat on it. I might just trim this off just a tiny bit. Sometimes with brisket, and there's nothing wrong, if you're running out of time, there's nothing wrong with buying a good brisket that has already been brined for you. There's a lot of great products out there. Again, I like to just kind of control my own destiny. So I have my glaze here. I'm just going to mix this up. And this has a little bit of the honey and brown sugar, but it's not overly sweet. We're going to just coat this nice and evenly. This really changes the end result of the corned beef. I love just basic corned beef, cabbage cooked in the cooking liquid that I have here, and boiled potatoes. That's all great. I love that kind of a meal. This mustard really kind of takes it up to the next level. One time I cooked corned beef for my wife's grandma, who is an amazing lady, and she was so upset that I was putting a glaze on the corned beef. So I did some for everybody. I did some of this for everybody else, kept some plain for her. She saw all of us enjoying this so much that her corned beef was made into soup the next day. So she ended up eating all of this corned beef too. So again, just kind of stepping out of your comfort zone. But this kind of a mix too. As your family tries this recipe, if you decide that you want to change it and add a little spice to it, add a little more of the Dijon mustard or more of the stone ground mustard, make it a little sweeter, definitely talk about it. I always believe in the family table or with friends, talk about the end result so that you can actually come up with something that everybody really enjoys. Even though I think my recipe and our recipe is the greatest and that's the one you should stick to, it probably isn't for your family. So definitely adjust those recipes as you go and really enjoy the cooking process. Can you get me a new cutting board? So now we're going to go into the cabbage. I have my liquid here. Do not throw away the liquid from cooking the corned beef. There's a lot of flavor in there. A lot of people will actually treat this just like a stew. They'll put their potatoes, their carrots, their cabbage in there. I kind of like keeping my potatoes separate. I like having a different flavor to my potatoes. But for your cabbage, this is very essential. The tradition for doing this is actually just basically cooking your cabbage in the big leaves and just throwing it in this liquid and letting it cook until usually it's falling apart. I'm not saying I dislike that, but this process that we just actually came up with this process. Last year we were doing a wine dinner down in Sonoma, and they asked me to last minute kind of produce this dinner, and we actually all kind of created this process on the fly in the kitchen. So what we did was we just took our cabbage, and it's about a half a head of cabbage. I trimmed the outside, which I already did, and then there's the core right here. This is very important to cut this core out, and I set it down flat like this. And you end up with a little Christmas tree shaped right there. Now I'm just gonna do kind of just a nice slice. You end up with about that size right there. And this looks like a lot of cabbage. This is going to cook down a lot. And again, we already pulled off. You usually want to, like the leaves, this leaf is, I'm not going to take this off. But when I start trimming this, usually the outside of the cabbage needs to be trimmed a little bit. And definitely it helps make sure there's no bacteria on it or anything. But I definitely will trim that off a little bit. But this, Britley already did this for us, which is why I like having good student sous chefs. They make my life a lot easier. The pastry chefs I'm not always such a fan of because they make my life a lot harder because I have to do a lot more cardio and stuff. So. Okay, now for our onion. Usually, those of you who maybe watched the video before, we always want to keep this intact, this part of the onion. For a julienne onion, what I like to do is I like to cut that out. And part of the reason I'm doing this, and I did this with the cabbage too, is I'm setting it down flat. For knife safety, having something rolling around and having a sharp knife in your hands doesn't always create great results, right? So by trimming this core out a little bit right here, I'm able to end up with a flat item to cut, which really helps for safety. And I always assume with a knife, I always think about what's going to happen when the knife slips. So I'm always thinking about knife safety. And part of knife safety is I'm going to remove gloves. And part of the reason I'm doing that is this is going to be cooked. And it's a lot safer actually cutting. You do not have to cut that fast to make it actually work, but there you go. So for our cabbage, we have our water up to a simmer. And I'm gonna add my cabbage right to my water. It's just, I'm gonna maybe get this just a little hotter here. And then in my pan over here, I'm gonna add bacon. And this is just a standard high quality thick sliced bacon. I'm gonna add just a little bit of oil, and you don't need to. The pan's hot. Then I'm gonna move this around. And I know the joke is if you add bacon to anything, it's gonna be better, right? Well, with this, it does make it a lot better. This is gonna totally change the way you think of cabbage on St. Patrick's Day. So we're gonna cook this a little bit. We talked about brining too, and usually when we're cooking here, we actually use our own house-cured bacon, so which has a lot less fat. This I'm gonna have to kind of watch. I'm gonna let this bacon, of course, is cooked, right? We don't have to worry about it being raw. We can eat this bacon just like this if you buy a cooked, cured bacon. Of course, for texture, I don't think any of us enjoy raw bacon. So we're gonna cook this a little bit. We'll let this render down a little bit. And then my water is coming up to a simmer. I'll go ahead and start with this. I did extra cabbage because I have a hungry film crew here. So we're gonna add the cabbage in here, and we're basically just blanching this now. So we're gonna cook this for about 5 minutes. And during this process, the same timing, the bacon and this mixture is gonna be cooked, and then we're gonna add the cabbage to it. So as you can see with the bacon, I want to get it just starting to kind of cook, and then I'm going to add the onions in there so they can cook together. And I like buying a pretty lean bacon so we get less of the fat coming off of it. And plus, those of you who like butter, and butter and cabbage are just an amazing combination. You can strain off a lot of this bacon grease and add a little butter. Not saying that you need both, but the butter and cabbage are, as I say, good friends. So I'm going to go ahead and add my onions here. And now everybody should be sauteing like that, right? So if you want to practice sauteing, saute pan is curved on the edge. Just put it down towards the end and flip it back towards you. If you want to practice doing this, actually just do it with a dry piece of toast. Cook a piece of toast and try flipping it over in the pan over and over again. So I'm going to crank this up a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and put in my caraway seeds. The caraway seeds are a big part of this dish. And it's not a lot. I'm going to add a little bit of thyme. Now I'm just going to cook all these together. Now my cabbage is starting to soften up, and again, it takes about 5 minutes. For our potatoes, these potatoes, basically what I did was after they were done, and when they're done, they're fork tender. And fork tender is basically where the fork goes through it with little resistance. We do not want red potatoes to be breaking apart, right? We want them still to have some texture. So we want to cook them so where there's very little. I should be able to go in and see how soft. I know you can't see how soft that is, but that goes in very easy, and it almost starts to break. But you do not want this breaking apart. For mashed potatoes, you might. Yes, we have a question?
We do have a question. The presenter, or Kara asked from the chat box, do you have a secondary meat option that's not pork? A different meat option that's not pork?
Oh, sorry. This is beef brisket. Oh. So using the beef brisket. Now, originally the Irish used pork, but pork was so expensive that they went to the beef brisket. So yeah, this is a beef brisket. But again, you can substitute other items for this for sure.
And we have a second question that asks if you can use coconut oil instead of butter.
Yes, you can use, there's avocado oils out there, coconut oils. You can definitely use whatever fat that you like. I like, and not a lot of butter, but I do like a little bit of butter. With the bacon, I usually do not strain off the bacon fat and add in the butter. And you don't need to add bacon to this either. So you can do this with just caramelized onions and the caraway seeds and stuff, and it comes out absolutely amazing. So our cabbage is about done. But if you can look, I don't know if they could show you in the pan very well, but there is, with a lean bacon, you see how lean that is? There's very, very little fat coming off that bacon. The bacon that we actually make has even less fat come off than that. I know some of you are saying, well, why would you want to get rid of the bacon fat, right? But that's just optional. So our cabbage is basically ready. You see how it's gotten where it's not standing straight up anymore. It's kind of limp. That's perfect right there. We're still going to cook it a little bit more with the onions and the bacon mixture. So I don't have a strainer here. This, of course, I'm not going to use the brine anymore. This, of course, would be a lot easier with the strainer to just pour this out. But and again, with this recipe here, just kind of create your own family recipe, and you'll be the bacon, the caraway seeds, and all those flavors together add a lot to this dish. I'm about done fishing here. So our bacon and our onions are just about done. So what we're going to do here, as soon as the onions become translucent, we can add a little color on here, but we don't really need that caramelization. We don't want to overpower and kind of add, and we want a great flavor in there, but we want the cabbage to still stand out. If I caramelize the onions too much, you're going to end up with that strong caramelization flavor of the onion. So, but again, that all becomes personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead and add my cabbage in here. Stir that around a little bit. And if you look, again, I'm really working hard not to hide the cabbage flavor. That looked like a lot of bacon and onions in there. However, there is a lot of flavor from the cabbage, and I don't like to hide things. I like everything to be showcased, and this day is a celebration to me of cabbage too. So I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and pepper to this. I'm not adding too much because the bacon already has some salt in it, right? I don't want to over salt this, so I can always salt it a little bit more at the end. So this is going to take about 5 minutes to cook here. Now back to the corned beef. We have our corned beef here that's been glazed. I know this looks like this grew a lot. This was from, this is kind of like what they do on TV, right? You put something in the oven, you pull something else out. So this was done a little earlier. Gloves. So this is an important part of the corned beef here. Again, going to the slicing part. It's a little harder to see with the glaze on it, but you can definitely still see a grain. So here, I'm looking at the corned beef. You might even have to flip it over sometimes, but you can definitely see lines here. Very important, again, to cut against the grain. So the lines are going like this. We want to cut the corned beef like this. This right here, you can also see the lines going like this. And the nice thing about corned beef is you can really see that. So you want to cut, again, against the grain. So we're going to take a nice sharp knife. This becomes a little messy. I don't know if you can see the color of that corned beef on the inside, that beautiful brine. And again, that's why I really like controlling my own, because 5 days with the brine that we produce, the corned beef is absolutely amazing. Another really neat kind of thing to think about is those that like pastrami. The pastrami starts out exactly the same way. You brine the beef brisket for 5 days. The difference is when you pull it out, and we will send recipes out to those who are viewing for the pastrami. You put a dry rub on it, you put it in a perforated pan, some water underneath, and you bake it until it's fork tender for about 4 or 5 hours. exactly the same. Nothing different except for how you're finishing it off. So it's another fun. We make pastrami here, and it's absolutely amazing. And then again, if you like a spicier pastrami, you can put a little more of the cracked pepper on it or different ingredients on the top. So it's absolutely amazing. So now with the brisket, different parts of the brisket, of course, they're going to have different characteristics. This is a little closer to the belly, a little bit more fat, a lot softer. So that's, but amazing. You can see that little kind of glistening, that nice bright red color. That's what you're looking for in a really good corned beef. So for the cabbage, you can look here and see how it's softened up. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the plate. And this, I would always, and I usually don't do this on live feeds, and this is gonna be kind of hard to try, but before you serve anything, you always taste it. That's how I stay so skinny, okay? I know that's a joke for all you guys out there, but you have to taste it. This would probably use a little bit more salt. So you could salt it a little bit more, but again, that's up to your family. You don't want to over salt things, but remember, we're starting with a lot of products here that we're not starting with anything processed, so it's very low in salt. So we're going to take this. It has great flavor of the caraway, but not overpowering. That was a little tricky there. So if you look at the cabbage, I love the traditional corned beef and cabbage, the boiled cabbage. This right here will definitely change the way that you approach your St. Patrick's Day. It just adds a lot more texture. The cabbage isn't cooked as long. It's not really soft. It still has it doesn't have any crunch texture to it, but it still has some texture to it. That little flavor from the smokiness from the bacon, the caraway seeds, those onions. This really is great, and then along with the corned beef that's glazed and then the potatoes, this really creates a great meal. Of course, you can add carrots and all those kind of things to it, but this is definitely my favorite way to do cabbage. I think it's time to talk about our dessert portion of it. So, Megan, are you ready?
I think so.
All right. Did I make enough of a mess here for you?
Not quite. All right, so the final part of our presentation is the Irish soda bread. It is also not completely Irish. Irish soda bread gets its name from the leavening agent, baking soda, but unfortunately the modern day recipe actually has more baking powder than baking soda in it. So right now I'm just gonna add all my flour, my baking powder, my baking soda, my sugar, salt, and then I'm gonna cut in my butter, which is actually down here. So when you cut in butter, it's a lot easier to use a food processor because then you don't have to do it by hand and it doesn't hurt you. You do have to have a bit of muscle to get this job done. So you want to start with cold butter and cut it in until it looks like coarse breadcrumbs. This is going to give you a nice flaky texture in your soda bread, and it'll be more like a scone slash bread instead of just a bread. So the story behind Irish soda bread is that it did start over in Ireland, but the leavening agent actually started over here by the Native Americans. Further on with the story is that most houses at the time didn't have ovens, so they would bake the Irish soda bread on the embers of the fire after cooking the main meal, and they would usually use a shallow pot or a pan. So today we're actually going to be using a pie tin to make it easier for serving. So this does take a lot longer, and I apologize for the silence. But eventually, your butter will stop sticking to the pastry blender. And another good technique to stop that from happening in the first place is to toss your butter in the flour before you begin.
So is there an easier way to do that?
Yep. I mentioned that they could use a food processor.
Yeah, we work really hard on not allowing our pastry cooks to do this early in the morning because they get really upset. So with the, she's looking at this right now. It's like, why did you not set up the blender for us? Part of what we do is we also teach our students to be able to buy something that costs $4, like one of these pastry cutters, and not have to buy a $175 machine to produce something. So we show them the hard knocks way to do it too.
I mean, it's beneficial.
Can we get the buttermilk for me?
Yes, please. When you start baking, it's always better to start the hard way so that you learn exactly what you're looking for before you start taking shortcuts. So once you get a nice coarse breadcrumb kind of texture, the flakier the butter, the better, because it's gonna bake out that way. Of course, you don't want giant chunks in your flour though. So once you get to this point, you toss your currants and your caraway seeds in. This prevents the buttermilk from making them soggy and then your bread going bad over time. And then lastly, you just add in your buttermilk. And mix it by hand until it's just combined. If you overmix it, you'll lose that flaky texture and you'll get more of a muffin texture instead of the flaky scone bread that we're going for. Now, when you make this at home, you probably don't want to do it on a black cloth because you can see how much of a mess it makes. Thank you, Chef. All right. So once your dough is coming together, form it into a ball and transfer it to your buttered pie pan. So I just have a little bit of butter and a pastry brush here, which take these guys off. And I'm just going to brush a light layer around the bottom and up the sides to prevent it from sticking. I'm also going to take a scraper. You can use a sharp knife as well. It works just as well. And butter this because we're going to score our bread. Many think that they used to do it this way to make it easier to serve. So you're just going to score a nice X in the top. You don't want to cut all the way down to the bottom, just enough to make the indents, and then bake. And then this is the final product.
Okay, so now we're talking about St. Patrick's Day. We think about beer served with, and I won't go into that tradition. I won't go into any facts about that. Just a little bit about when you're choosing a beer. Of course, a nice red beer or something lighter. I found that this meal is usually when you're trying to pair a beer or a beverage of any kind with what you're serving it with, you think about the level of that food. So this food is very subtle in a lot of ways. So we don't want to serve too hoppy of a beer or a beer that has too much of a punch to it. We want to serve something nice and light. So this beer from Ellensburg, Irish Death, is nice light beer. We also have Paradise Creek's beer that's right here from town. This is the Poker Face Blonde beer. And they're both amazing beers that go very, very well And of course, I mean, the Guinness, a lot of people think of if they haven't drank Guinness, they think of a Guinness style beer as a really strong, powerful, they look at it and it's like, wow, that beer is going to be just overpowering. Actually, Guinness is one of the smoothest beers. So those type beers pair extremely well with this meal because they are subtle. So I always look at, and when you're talking about pairing, it's what you like too. If you like a red wine with this, then drink red wine with this. If you like, a soft drink, and then of course have a soft drink. But again, it's what you like. But I found that a lighter beer definitely works a lot better with this meal. So you go through all this work, and if you serve a beer or a beverage that's really overpowering, you're going to actually overtake the food, and it really changes the flavor profile of the food too. They can complement each other, or they can actually fight each other. And so you want to choose something that actually complements each other. So I think if we don't have any other questions, we have a question? Okay.
Thank you. Our next question is from the chat box and asks, are raisins okay to use instead of currants?
Yes, raisins are. I prefer currants just because they're a little bit smaller, and they kind of are a little more subtle to the bread. But again, raisins are definitely, I mean, you can chop up figs, you can do, again, that's what's beautiful about these recipes. And any recipe is they really should just be an inspiration. They should not be, this is exactly how you have to produce something. Okay.
And our next question asks, are you mixing the dough for the Irish soda bread similarly to the way you would mix biscuits?
It's a quick bread, so it is exactly the same way as scone or a biscuit. You want to start with cold butter. You want to cut that in. You want to work the dough as little as possible so that you don't, the gluten gets activated as soon as the liquid hits it, but if you overwork it, you start to build those gluten strands and you end up with a tougher dough. So, and you saw, Megan did an amazing job of just slowly kind of working that dough. And you guys are probably thinking, wow, it's like that's taking a long time. You don't want to just put it in a mixer. You want to just slowly work the moisture into it.
If you're not a beer drinker, what kind of wine would this chef suggest to pair with this meal?
I think with this, maybe a kind of a Pinot or something like that, something really light, or Merlot or something if you're going to go for the red. But probably more in the lines of a dry Riesling or something would go really well with this, something not too sweet. That's what I would think, a dry Riesling or maybe even an unoaked Chardonnay. I don't think I would go too strong on those. I love the oaky Chardonnays, but probably nothing too strong in that, or something with too many tannins. Just like exactly like I was talking about with the beer, you would not want to go something that was too overpowering with it. Chenin Blanc or something like that might pair really well with this too. So it's something on the lighter side, and probably not too much on the acidity side. All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and come here, you two. And of course, this is the whole reason I am here, and they did an amazing job tonight. And as you saw, I think they actually probably looked and sounded a little bit better than I did. But they really do a great job, and they do this on a daily basis. They're not just doing this for this event. They are training. We have 125 students come through here a week, and these individuals are out here in the trenches training those students, and this is why I come to work every day. So thank both of you for coming, and enjoy your St. Patrick. I think we have one more question.
We do have one more question that came in, and it's more of a general question in regards to cabbage and other vegetables that the person asks, I read that we should soak vegetables with a little salt to kill germs. Do you think that's important? What is your opinion?
If you're soaking vegetables with salt, you're trying to get rid of moisture. So it depends, like when we make zucchini bread, we'll salt them, just the zucchini sometimes just a tiny bit, and let it drain overnight. But it all depends on what the end result you're looking for. What I generally say is before you cook a carrot, you taste the carrot. And then you decide what to do with it. So it all depends on what the end result that you want. But usually salting a vegetable will remove some of the moisture, unless you do it more of a brine, and it may actually pull some moisture into it. Perfect. Well, now I guess my finale is absolutely there. So please enjoy your St. Patrick's Day feast, and be safe out there on the roads, and hopefully these recipes helped inspire you. Again, these students inspire me, and enjoy your meal. Thank you.